out this common time. So Dr. Sharma has about 25 years of experience. He started actually his career with the government of Punjab, and then he moved to the government of India. He led a lot of initiatives at ASSOCHAM, then the Price Waterhouse Coopers, and now he is leading, and also the Tatas. I think I don't want to read out things from his the CV that was shared with all of us. Uh, but currently he's leading a lot of research initiatives as the chief economist of the PhD Chamber of Commerce, and we all know PhD Chamber of Commerce is one of the leading chambers in India, which was founded way back in 1905. And recently, Dr. Sharma was instrumental in creating a new index, which is known as the GPS index, and that index sort of takes the base to 2018, and it sort of creates a value for inflation, taking our GST tax also on as one of the indicators to assess India's performance. I think he would be an expert to explain more about this index, but the government has been using this index a lot. So that's about Dr. Sharma, and I now welcome our Dean, Dr. Heggde, to basically for a welcome and for generally just to give an outlook about a school as well, ma'am.
Thanks, Payal. Thank you for conducting such events or online webinars with eminent personalities such as Dr. Sharma. I did go through his profile and very impressive. Good thing is that he's associated with many business schools that I'm very closely, working with, and that in itself is such a pleasure to have and to know and to also have him speak to our students. Dr. Sharma, I'm sure you've heard of UPES at Dehradun. We started in 2003 as a domain specialization university, one of the first, understanding the requirement of industry much ahead, and grown in the area of energy, power, and such areas, much ahead of others in the same, in the market as in schools and universities. And today we are known in our specialization wide and far. And today, as we sit in the cusp of a change, we have recently rebranded and repositioned ourselves, including the school and the university, to the University of Tomorrow. With that in mind, as I already told, we are ahead of in the curve when it comes to the requirement of market and what the future needs. So the school is also working on being the business school for digital tomorrow. So while we strengthen our domain specializations such as energy, aviation, and power and sustainability, where environment and sustainability, where we are very well known across the industry till date. I know some of my friends in Bangalore and others who say that, like, the aviation industry, if we want anybody in the aviation sector, UPES School of Business is where we go. So this is what all the industries, most of the industry is speaking about. And today we speak about looking at digital and digitalization and how technology is impacting the business of tomorrow. And in that, the policy and the public policy, the specialization that we have is one of its kind in India. And not many schools, business schools and undergraduate schools provide, the subject on or the degree program on public policy. So we do have students. I find the undergraduate students of public policy very focused and very determined to give back to the society in terms of in the area of governance and others. So apart from that, we as a business school are among the top 20 business schools in the country in our undergraduate courses and programs. That includes both public and private sector schools and universities. In our MBA programs, we have gone up to top 50 in NIRF ranking. Now NIRF has more than somewhere around 9,000 business studies and schools and colleges that participate. Among those numbers, we are among the top 50. It's a big achievement. We could easily become among the top 30 in coming few years, or perhaps higher. I also see some of my senior faculty colleagues. I think Dr. Vijay, who is Dean at School of Law, is also part of this conversation today. So apart from students, I think I'm sure this topic that you've chosen as the budget of 2020 and the post-pandemic or during pandemic, we are still in pandemic, is something that is will be of very much interest, and for all of us and all of our students as well. This in itself will be a very historic kind of budget, as we all know. 2 years running in pandemic, and that I think the lot of thought that should go through will be going through, and there's a lot of study that is being done, and expectations, huge expectations in an environment as such. It's a disruption, total disruption, and we speak about double disruption. I don't know if we should call it as triple disruption now, because with 2 years continues in pandemic, and hence I think the economic recovery that is required, the job focus that is needed to make, and also making a market that which will increase demand. This is like a double-edged sword, and it's very difficult. But as I told you, at the university, we are focusing on these areas. We are committed to focus on startups and creating a startup ecosystem and creating jobs. We are focused on multidisciplinary aspects where our students can study from different schools. Unlike a standalone business school, which will only talk about management and business study, here our students can take up courses in law. We call it as design your own degree, or take up something in AI or computer science or design school, or health sciences, or whatever, or liberal studies. So there's a lot that the students can do here. Apart from that, we are an institution, especially the School of Business has more than 250 senior PhD scholars who are from the industry, and who bring in a lot of experience and business problems that which we take it to the classroom, and the life problems are given to the students, so that they can really be a little ahead in problem solving, and actually understand what the society and the market and the economy and the policy, and then look at what kind of policy that will work well for the society in the future. So I won't take too much of time. I could go on about the university and the school. I would, with a warm welcome, and I'm not too sure if you visited Dehradun and our campus, but this is among the top 10 beautiful campuses in the country. And as we speak, we can see snowfalls in the mountain. So I would like to invite you over soon, once we are able to have you in the campus, and have you here for a couple of days, and then interact with the students personally. Thank you so much, and over to you, Dr. Sharma.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. So, Dr. Sharma, without any further ado, I would really, request you to probably start with the presentation. So, Dr. Sharma, unlike the format last time, Dr. Sharma has a formal presentation. So, because the topic is such that we would need a lot of data and indicators for today. So, we would really request him to go ahead. And in case there are any issues, then I'm always here to show things as a backup on my screen.
Thank you, Dr. Professor Githa Heggde and Professor Payal De. Thank you very much for inviting me to express my viewpoint about the Indian economy, how the country is moving ahead with a lot of reforms undertaken by the government during the last 18 months. So and thank you students for participating in this very prominent program organized by your institution, and I think this will be useful for you for the futuristic growth trajectory of the Indian economy. And before sharing the formal presentation, I would like to discuss something about Indian economy, like how the Indian economic trajectory has moved during the last 70 years since its independence. So Indian economy is Indian economy moves from slow to steady. Economy was very slow in the 1950s, 1960s. Then Indian economy was steady in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Even in the 90s, growth rate was not that much fast, and growth was only at around somewhere between 4 to 5%. Then in 2000s, economy with the lot of reforms undertaken by the government during their respective regimes, economy was very fast in 2000s, then the fastest in 2010. So economy moved from slow to steady pace, then steady to fast, then fast to fastest during the last 70 years. And last 15 years were very I should say the dramatic for the Indian economy, not for the Indian economy, but for the global economy. Since the Lehman crisis changed the whole economic thought process of the globe. Because in 2008, whole world economy was impacted by the Lehman crisis, starting from US economy. And after the US slowdown, then there was a severe slowdown in the Europe, and before Europe recovered, Japan was in very severe slowdown. Then before the Japan recovered, China was in the severe slowdown. And before China recovered, there was a trade war between China and US. And before the trade war settled, we were in the cyclical or structural slowdown. There were, if you remember, there were a lot of discussions and programs, webinars, seminars, and discussions at the government platforms, at the industry bodies, and the various intellectual organizations, that whether India is facing a cyclical slowdown or the structural slowdown. But before we decide that this slowdown is cyclical or structural, we were impacted by the pandemic COVID-19 in the January 2020, and that was the unfortunate year that we lost so many lives, and economy was impacted like anything, and we saw the severe and a deep slowdown and deep lows of the economic indicators, and economy was impacted by the pandemic COVID-19. Challenge and an opportunity also for the economic thought process, that how to move forward, and the whole world is facing the pandemic impact, and Indian economy is also not prone from the global development. So we have to come out with the practical thought process and to provide the support to the economy, to the people, to the trade, to the industry. And government took so many measures during the last 18-19 months to support the economy from there. And now we are again in the prominent growth trajectory. We have observed growth rate of more than 20% in the first quarter, and second quarter was also promising, and the growth figures are now looking better and attractive in the global charts, that we have recovered from the lows of first quarter of 2020 to the high growth trajectory in the first few months of the current financial year. So I would like to share some facts and figures about the economic trajectory which has moved during the last 2 years. So I would like to share my presentation on the same. Hope you are able to see the presentation.
We are able to see your screen. Yes, I think the presentation. Yes,
Okay.
now we can. Now we can. Yes.
Is it okay now?
Yes, Dr. Sharma, it's perfect. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Firstly, I would like to discuss the economic indicators, how the economy has moved from the lows of 2021 and what was the position before the pandemic period of 2021. Our GDP was also in the slowdown before the pandemic period because, as I discussed, that we were deciding that whether the slowdown is cyclical or structural. And before we decide the cyclical or structural slowdown, we were in the severe slowdown caused by the pandemic COVID-19. And economy went down by minus 7.3% in 2021. But now the estimates are that we will grow at the rate of 9.2%, which is the forecast by not only by IMF, but by many forecasting agencies throughout the world. And our own estimates are also somewhere between 9.5% to 10%, which is through our GPS index that already discussed by Payal Day, that we have developed an index of GPS, which is GST collections, stands for G, and then passenger vehicles growth stands for P, and S for Sensex, because this is an indication for the growth trajectory of Indian economy, which captures the supply side economics from the GST collections, whether the supply is happening or not, whether the supply is moving up or not. That is indicated by the indicator G, which is GST. Then P, passenger vehicle, because if the demand is happening, then the passenger vehicles growth also moves up. So that's why we have selected the P indicator for the passenger vehicles, which is indicating the demand trajectory of the Indian economy. And third one is the Sensex, which is an indicator of the policy environment. If something is not happening good, then Sensex goes down. Like today, Sensex was impacted by severe slowdown because now uncertainty is re-emerging once again, because this new variant is impacting and creating volatility in the global markets, and there are talks that US will taper sooner than later, and liquidity flows will not be that much intact in the developing and emerging economies. So that's why the economies are becoming cautious, and markets are also becoming volatile. So this indicator S is indicating the policy environment. So GPS becomes a great pathfinder for the economic growth trajectory of the futuristic growth prospects. So according to our GPS, we have forecasted that we will grow somewhere between 9.5% to 10% for the current financial year, and the growth will be at around 7.7% in the next financial year of 2022-2023. And coming to the industry growth was not that much promising before the pandemic period because we were already in the minus trajectory. Economy was facing slowdown, and industrial development was not happening, and industrial production possibilities were impacted by so many lacunas. And then government took so many measures in the months of July, August, September, October, November. If you remember, during the period, second half of the 2019, there were a lot of reforms by the Honorable Finance Minister, and the economy was on the verge to take shape and to post a good growth trajectory that was announced on the 1st of February 2020 by Honorable Finance Minister, that we will grow at the rate of 7.7%. But unfortunately, that had not happened because of the pandemic period. But the industry was already impacted by the slowdown before the Corona period. But during the Corona period, the industry IIP growth was in the minus trajectory, minus 8.4%. Then now, so far, we have recovered to the level of 10.5%. I believe this is majorly because of the base effect, because we were in the severe slowdown and growth was in the minus trajectory. So on the low base effect, now the growth is coming and showing a great double-digit growth. So core infrastructure growth was also in minus. Now, so far we have achieved at around 14% in the current financial year. Then merchandise export. This is very promising growth trajectory of the merchandise exports. I believe we have posted the good number during the last 9 months in the exports growth. I believe this is the highest growth we achieved during the last 60-70 years. And we have already posted the $300 billion in the global kitty. So now growth is at around 50%, and moving ahead, we have target of $400 billion for the current financial year, and we are very confident that we will post this number and we will achieve this trajectory by March end. Then CPI inflation and the WPI inflation, these are the worrying factors because WPI is significantly high as compared with the last year, maybe because of some low base effect, but still practically there are skyrocketing commodity prices, and price cost margins of the producers are not that much intact, and they are facing heat of the high commodity prices in the international market, and which are also impacting the production possibilities and the business sentiment. So this is not good for the long-term trajectory of the production processes. So we have requested the government, and we have written so many times that we have to improve our supply chain, and we have to take measures to control the prices, particularly for the raw materials, which are the basic inputs for the industry. And exchange rate is, I believe, promising, though we were impacted by the pandemic period, and there was a significant impact on almost all the economic indicators. But with the so many measures, the exchange rate remained within control, and now exchange rate is at around 74.26 in the first few months of the current financial year, and I believe this will remain intact, and exchange rate will be in the controlled trajectory. So I would like to mention a few reforms which shaped the Indian economy during the pandemic period. Starting from the March 2020, the government announced 1,70,000 crore relief package under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. The first reforms announced by the government was for the poorest people of the country, that they took measures for the poor people. That was Garib Kalyan Yojana, and that was announced in March 2020. Then government announced second set of reforms, that was India COVID-19 emergency response and health system preparedness package. That was for the 15,000 crore to make strong the health system in India, and to provide relief to various health providers. So in May 2020, then Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji announced the economic package. That was again a clarion call for the Atmanirbhar Bharat, and we took so many measures, and that was a great support from the government side, that we provided around 20 lakh crore to a stimulus to the Indian economy in terms of various relief measures for the MSMEs, for the NBFCs, for the infrastructure, for civil aviation, for the farm sector, for the contact services. Almost all the segments were touched by the set of reforms, which was under the Atmanirbhar Bharat 1, then Atmanirbhar Bharat 2, then Atmanirbhar Bharat 3, and in June 2021, Honorable Finance Minister Madam Nirmala Sitharaman announced again a supplement of a stimulus of 6,28,000 crores. So I believe these reforms and these stimulus packages were at around 30 lakh crore in totality. I think which becomes a great chunk of the GDP, and that was also comparable with the advanced economies support provided to their respective economies. Not only the government took measures, but RBI also provided so many relief measures in terms of the credit facility and the reduced rate of interest for the masses, for the industry, for the people, for the consumers, and for the various segments which were impacted by the pandemic COVID-19. And how the industry moved, and how the pandemic impacted the industry growth scenario, because the partial and complete lockdowns in many states and strict restrictions impacted the demand trajectory majorly, and that's why demand was not happening, and that also boosted the unemployment, and people were not able to deploy workforce in their respective factories. But the liquidity support provided by various economies supported the commodity prices, and commodity prices were skyrocketing, and the input costs increased significantly of the producers, and they were not able to produce much on the high commodity prices, and this demand supply gap, then supply was also impacted, and that shaped the WPI high in the high growth scenario, and the WPI went up to the double digits. So depressed demand, and problematic supply chains, and problematic raw material availability, and high raw material prices impacted the whole scenario of economy, and escalated the wholesale price index, and that also supported the CPI, because if the WPI inflation is in the higher trajectory for many months, then CPI also becomes prominent, and CPI also moves up. So the economic activity was impacted by the cost of raw materials. Then availability of working capital was not that much intact, because if the demand is not happening, then your inventories piled up, and you are not able to fulfill your working capital requirements, because you are not able to sell, and you are not able to get money from the market. Then maintaining the price cost margins, because of the high commodity prices, the profitability factor was also impacted, and demand weakness, then repayment of loans, then that also become a major issue for the entrepreneurs. Then cost of capital, and cost of compliances, these are the already significant hurdles for the producers. So how the economy was comparable? I should discuss the comparable trajectory of Indian economy with the other economies. We have considered the top 10 economies and the world economy separately. In the top 10 economies, India's growth rate was 4% before the pandemic period. I think that was the highest growth number for the top 10 economies that hosted by the Indian economy in 2019. But again, in the 2020, because of the pandemic period, we went down. We were in the minus 7.3%, but we were better than United Kingdom. But United Kingdom and Italy, but the economic growth was better, though they were in the minus trajectory, but United States only minus 3.4%. China was in the positive growth trajectory. That was a major surprise for the whole world economy, that despite the originator of the pandemic, coronavirus, posted the positive growth trajectory in the pandemic period. So all the other 9 economies were in the minus, and world economy was also in minus. Then in 2021, because of, I believe, majorly the low base effect, now the economies recovered significantly, and fortunately we are the number one in the growth scenario. We will post the 9.5%, which is the projection by the various agencies, sometime 9.2 or 9.5. I believe the growth will be somewhere between 9 to 10% if the economy goes on the same environment, if the pandemic is not becoming or worsening in the coming days. So in 2022, we will again be the prominent and prospective economy in the top 10 economies. We will post 8.5%. That is the projection by the by the IMF. So Atmanirbhar Bharat has supported the economy, and I believe this was a great mantra by the government, because each and every sector was touched by the Atmanirbhar Bharat. The 5 pillars of the Atmanirbhar Bharat, as you must be knowing, that economy, infrastructure, systems, vibrant demography, and demand. These are the 5 major pillars of the Atmanirbhar Bharat to become Atmanirbhar and to support the economy and to create employment opportunities for the growing young population in the country. So I believe Atmanirbhar supported the economic thought process not only of the central government but also of the state governments, and state governments also took so many measures to support their respective population and their respective youngsters, and to support their respective laborers to mitigate the impact of pandemic COVID-19. And how the budget, because budget is a major exercise and very important development of the financial year. So in the last budget of 21-2022, the government's thrust was majorly on the health sector, though they supported the infrastructure also, and there were reforms for the each and every segment of the economy, but majorly the health sector was at the radar of the government. The budget recognized the significance of improving health in sector, and the total outlay was 2.23 lakh crore for the health sector in the last budget. So budget was different because the focus of the budget shifted towards the healthcare sector, and there was a major announcement of the DFIs, that is development finance institutions, and they capitalized around 20,000 crore for the DFIs, that is for the national asset monetization pipeline. So the government now, to create and to mobilize the resources, now is moving ahead with the national asset monetization scheme to facilitate the people and to facilitate the various segments of the Indian economy. And government adopted the counter-cyclical fiscal policy, and government was not that much worried about the fiscal scenario, and they projected 6.8% fiscal deficit for the 21-2022. And we are happy that so far the fiscal deficit is within control, and there is an improvement of 0.20 basis points in the overall targeted figure, and our fiscal deficit is expected to be at around 6.6% for the current financial year. That is the news that is the positive news, that foreign investors and the various other segments will be happy to know this, that our fiscal deficit is going to remain under control, and we will post a better number that we anticipated in the start of the financial year. The government announced a huge capital expenditure for the year 21-22. The budget support for the capital expenditure was increased from 4.4 lakh crore in 2021 to 5.5 lakh crore, an increase of more than 1 lakh crore was the support from the government during the last budget. And moving ahead for the Union Budget 2023, what should be the scenario, and how the industry and the people are expecting from the government? I would discuss about the industry expectations, because people expectations, you always know that they always demand the lower taxes and increased personal disposable income. But from the industry side, we have suggested to focus majorly on the demand side, because if the demand trajectory is going up, then demand will create environment for the employment in the factories, because if you demand for the goods and services, then the producers also expand their production possibilities, and they deploy more and more workforce in their respective factories. And with the more and more workforce in the respective factories, they increase the people of the income, and that becomes a major multiplier effect for whole of the economy, and economy moves up to the anticipated growth trajectory. So our major focus is on the demand side economics, that the government must focus on the on increasing the income of the people at the ground level. So to have such outcomes, we have suggested the ease of doing business for the industry, so that industry is able to produce more, and people are able to consume more, and we are able all to export also the surplus production which is produced should be exported to the various countries. That we have already targeted $400 billion exports for the current financial year, and for the next year I believe the target would be in the much higher trajectory. So there was a scheme of the Emergency Credit Line Guarantee Scheme, ECLGS, and we have suggested the government that they should increase the scheme to the to 31st of March 2023. So that will be a great support to the industry. And we have suggested the government that there must be an increase in the agriculture investments for the agriculture infrastructure. Here I would like to mention that earlier these investments were at around 20% of the total gross capital formation in I believe 1980s and 90s. But in 2010s, after the Lehman crisis, the gross capital formation for the agriculture sector was at around 10-11% of the total gross capital formation. But now this is only 6% only. So we have suggested the government that they should increase the allocation for the gross capital formation for the agriculture sector, so that the agriculture infrastructure becomes strong and we are able to reduce the wastages, which are at around more than 25% currently. And our suggestion, our target is to reduce the wastages less than 10% in the next 2-3 years, with the support of great agriculture infrastructure for the agri economy, so that there are more and more cold storages, more and more warehouses, and more rural roads with their strong connectivity with the mandis, and strong connectivity with the great grain markets, as we have greatest markets in the grain segment. We have the great market in Punjab, which is I believe the largest in Asia. So we have suggested to support the agriculture infrastructure with more and more allocations. And we have appreciated the government that they increased the budget expenditure in the health sector by 137%. But going forward, our expectation is that they will again increase this trajectory with more than 100%, because still we need more doctors and other paramedical staff to support such bad health systems. And as new variants are coming again and again, so we should be very cautious in the next many years that our health infrastructure, our health support becomes more and more strong to help the citizens. So our suggestion regarding the small businesses is that government should bring down the corporate tax to the level of 25%, though the government already introduced this reform, but this is not for the many MSMEs which are under the proprietary business. I believe more than 70-80% MSMEs are in the proprietary business, though so we have suggested the government that they should bring down the corporate tax to the level of 25% for all the businesses which are in the MSME segment. So to give a great momentum to exports, we have suggested that there must be a tax-free income for the exporters, which is incremental. Suppose I have exported 100 crores exports, and last year, and this year this is 110 crores. So the 10 crore income, 10 crore turnover should be tax free. So that's why this will be a major pushing factor and a great attractive factor for the exporters to export more and more in the foreign markets. So to increase the tax base, we have suggested the government for the more and more simplification of the forms and more simplification of the tax rules, so that everybody is able to pay the taxes and to file their ITRs. So for the indirect taxation, we have suggested that basic custom duty should be reduced where there are increases of the prices by more than 50%, then there should be a 50% cut in the basic custom duty, so that raw material prices becomes favorable for the producers. So Union Budget 2022-2023 priorities, I believe government should focus on the fiscal deficit, controlling the fiscal deficit, because moving ahead, we have to rationalize the fiscal deficit, and there must be focus on the disinvestment from the government side to mobilize the resources. Then there must be focus on the enhanced capital investments also. And for the industries, I believe the industry demands the refueling the consumption growth, then a reduction in the tax burden, direct taxes and indirect taxes, and reduction in the cost of doing business, because we have achieved a great growth trajectory in these of doing business from 142 in 2014 to 63 in 2020, but that is not supported by the reduced cost of doing business. Cost of doing business is still very, very high. I would like to mention the costs which are high: the cost of capital, the cost of power, the cost of compliances, the cost of labor, the cost of getting land. All these costs are impacting the trajectory of the business scenario. So the ease of doing business will become only and only fruitful if that is also synced with the reduced cost of doing business. So with these words, I thank you for your patience, and I am open for the questions from the students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for putting all the complex things in a very sort of a concise and concretized manner where we could all read while you were presenting. But of course, as I'm also teaching the whole the batch students who are from public policy, I do understand that some of the things that you have presented were a little bit technically could be a little bit intimidating for some students. So I am expecting that initially maybe some students would have questions. So the format for question and answer, what we had planned is that we want to take up a few questions by the students, whatever clarifications and comments that the students have to pose. I could think of a lot of questions while Dr. Sharma was presenting. So I'm sure all the students have some sort of clarifications either on technicalities. So first, let's have students, and we also have professors of our department. So once we have taken up a few questions by the students, we could open the discussion with the professors, like an audio visual, where we could sort of enter into a little bit of a clarification also. So any student would like to ask something, you could please post it here because we are sort of done with the presentation for now. So any student has anything to ask? Would you like to ask? So if you have any questions, you could please type it here on the chat box. If not, then you can take more time and we could start with the discussion round with the professors. Okay. So while students are taking time, may I request the professors to sort of have their audios and videos on and maybe introduce themselves and maybe ask any kind of a question or comment that they have. I think we are still waiting. Am I audible to everyone? Can the students hear me? I think I'm unmuted. Okay, so I have questions. Yeah, Vedanshi, please feel free to type your question. Meanwhile, I have some questions. So, Dr.
Yeah,
Sharma,
please tell me,
while you were
Professor Payal.
presenting,
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions actually. So while you were presenting, I really couldn't, I found it very surprising that the merchandise export that has increased to almost 50%. So what are the components of the merchandise that we see? And you said that this has been the largest increase in 60 to 70 years. So what are the components of that merchandise, and what kind of industry is fueling this merchandise export?
Yes, yes. Merchandise exports are majorly the exports in the manufacturing segment.
Yes.
Because we have two categories of the exports. One is the merchandise exports and second is the services exports.
Yes.
So merchandise exports includes all the exports which are by the manufacturing segment, and majorly our merchandise exports are in the petroleum products, in the agriculture products, in the pharmaceutical products, in the engineering products, in the chemicals, organic chemicals and unorganic chemicals, and then we have our exports in the leather and textiles. So these are the major categories which are falling under the merchandise exports, and I believe these categories contribute at around 70-80% of the total merchandise exports. So the majorly the exports are supported by the agriculture exports. Last year we posted more than $40 billion of the agri and food products, and in the current year also, because we have a great agriculture production, and last year also during the pandemic period we grew at the rate of 3.5% in the agriculture economy, and we were able to post the export growth of more than 40% in the agriculture and food products. So now again, these exports are becoming more and more prominent, and there are a lot of avenues in the international market to increase the agriculture exports, and we have a target of $60 billion in the next 2-3 years, and then again $100 billion in the next 4-5 years to become more and more prominent in the global import economy, as there are more than $1,300 billion imports worldwide in the agri and food products. So, and second is the pharmaceutical segment, because we have a great strength in the pharmaceutical exports in the international markets, and we are moving ahead with new highs every year. And textile sector exports are also becoming promising once again, and that is also a major export segment in the manufacturing category in the merchandise exports. Here I would like to mention that why I am saying that this will be the highest volume of the exports for the current financial year, because earlier our peak was at $340 billion, or somewhere between 330 to 40 billion dollar 4-5 years ago. But again, we were not able to post that much trajectory because of the various factors. There were some slowdown in the international market, and again thereafter there was trade war between US and China. But now we have a great opportunity to increase this growth trajectory. Now we have already achieved more than $300 billion, and for the full year we will be able to post $400 billion for the whole financial year. That will be the highest number of the last 60-70 years since our independence in the merchandise exports. And in the services exports, we are not that much worried, because we are always in the surplus. We export higher than our imports, and we are always in the services surplus in the services exports. And our services exports are at around $225 billion, and our imports are $130-140 billion, and we are always surplus of $70-80 billion in the services exports, and overall trade deficit also becomes favorable with the support of the services exports.
Okay. All right, Dr. Sharma. It's still surprising, because I think India has traditionally been considered a service exporting country, but now we see that Manufacturing has sort of changed that trend. And so this change in manufacturing, we see this maybe because of the Make in India campaign, or maybe through the stimulus packages, or has this happened like your data showed that it was the during the COVID that we have seen this surplus and not before that? So is it also because of the surplus, and also is it because that during the pandemic we were trying to sort of rely the self-reliant, the Atmanirbhar scheme? Was it also because of that?
Yes, there are so many factors, because first is as you rightly said, that competitiveness of the economy, though we are providing so many reforms, and ease of doing business is also happening. But if we are able to reduce our cost factor, then I believe we will achieve new and new growth highs in the export segment, because still our exports are impacted by some lack of export infrastructure, and high logistic cost and high cost of raw material that is impacting the competitiveness of the exporters in the international market. So government is doing a lot, and they are providing great facilitation to the manufacturing activity, and they are connecting with the global supply chains also. And as re-engineering of the global supply chains is happening, I believe our entrepreneurs will be able to capture the great market opportunity in this difficult time, and they will be able to export more and more in the international market.
Sure. Okay, thank you, sir. So I have two questions. In fact, so two questions by our students, Srishti and Arsh. So Srishti and Arsh, would you be interested in quickly opening your AVs and asking your questions fluently, or would you do you want me to read it out on my own? Okay, so Arsh, you can maybe do that. I will be reading out Srishti's question. So she has a good question. She's asking that in your presentation, the WPI increased from 1.20 in 1920 to 12.5 in 2020-2021, which is very sharp increase. And in December, this was 14.2. So she's asking, what are these reasons? Is it because of the pandemic or some other factors?
No, reasons, there are so many reasons. Firstly, the skyrocketed commodity prices. As I mentioned, that
Yes.
the prices of the basic raw materials like basic metals, steel, copper, zinc, all these prices went up significantly, and there was an increase of more than 100% in the prices of such commodities during the last 1 year. So that escalated the overall prices of the raw materials. And again, second factor was the easy liquidity, because so many countries provided the support to their respective economies in terms of stimulus and reduced cost of capital. So that's why easy money, or I would say the easy liquidity, also supported the prices. And though the demand was not that much intact, but the prices of the basic commodities remained intact. And third factor was the low base effect, because last year during the pandemic time we saw low inflation. Inflation was in the minus trajectory for so many months. So this 1.2 figure is an average of the whole year, but for many months the inflation was in the minus trajectory. So on that, the low base effect, now the inflation is for many months in the double digits, when we saw inflation in the minus during the same months in the last financial year. And fifth point is the disrupted supply chains. Sometimes there are lockdowns, partial lockdowns, full lockdowns, and raw materials are sometimes disrupted, and companies are not able to get their adequate raw materials at a particular point of time. So the supply constraints also provide opportunity to the suppliers to enhance the prices with the limited supply sets. So all these factors have impacted and escalated the trajectory of the inflation in the high growth.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Dr. Sharma. So can I ask Arsh to interact once? Maybe he can ask the question in person. Or is it not possible to do that?
Good evening, sir. Good evening. So can you hear me?
No, Arsh, there is some disturbance in your visual, so I can read your question. So Arsh is asking, it's a very recent sort of development that Raghuram Rajan, he has highlighted that on one hand, the larger firms, they are in good shape. The MSMEs in India, they are witnessing constraints in financing and credit. So how can the upcoming budget they can address the MSMEs in the upcoming?
Yes, very good question, Professor Payal, because I also agree with
Yes.
this connotation.
Yes.
Because large firms are they are very much placed in the market, and the large conglomerates they are lesser worried about the availability of credit because they are significantly connected with the global supply chains, and their global integratedness is very high. So that's why the production possibilities, I believe, 2-3 years ago, I was going through some economic survey and I read that 0.39% companies are contributing 40% of India's production. So that's why the role of MSME is not becoming more and more prominent. MSMEs contribute only 31% of the total GDP. And why the MSMEs are not able to enhance this share? Because they face a lot of problems. Firstly, their major problem is getting the finances. Though there are a lot of reforms by the government during the last many years, and particularly during the last many months, last 18 months, there are a lot of reforms. But still, the MSMEs, particularly the small businesses, MSMEs, they are facing so many challenges in getting financing from the banking sector, because banks always demand for the collaterals. So MSMEs are not able to provide adequate collaterals to get the finances. So that's why sometimes their cost of credit and sometimes the availability of credit becomes very problematic, and they are not able to expand much. And grow in the comfortable zone or the anticipated zone because of the crunch of the financials. So this connotation by the great economist Raghuram Rajan is very meaningful, that there must be reforms and there must be adequate reforms for the MSME sector so that they are able to get adequate finances from the banking sector, because MSMEs are the next growth driver of the Indian economy. And they will be the major employment provider, employment creators in the economy. Because large conglomerates, they are at the, though they are contributing a lot in the production processes, but I believe the employment going forward will happen with the support of the small businesses, majorly MSMEs, startups. All these are the major growth drivers of the Indian economy moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sharma. That's a very sort of a convincing explanation, and of course, we all follow Dr. Rajan, and he has been in the news recently about whenever there is a budget or whenever there is a major policy shift happening in India. We all, sort of have these discussions on platform, and Dr. Rajan has always some very good posts where he discusses the pros and cons of the Indian economy. So I have one more question by a student. Andrew, do you want to read out your question in person? You can just unmute yourself and yeah.
I'm audible, ma'am?
Yeah, perfectly audible.
Yeah. So good afternoon, sir. So I'm Andre. So my question is, like, I will sum it up. Like with the onset of the pandemic, various governments have been called down to pass huge spending bills and stimulus packages in order to inject money into the economy and to revive it. But some have said that injecting so much money into the economy will run up huge budget deficits and accumulate a large amount of government debt, and such interventions will set a really bad precedent. And should we focus on more, fiscally conservative or responsible measures of like cutting government spending and maybe deregulating a few industries and adopting a bit more fiscally conservative policies in the future, rather than just spending money left, right, and center?
Yes, very good question, because I am not in favor of cutting the government expenditure or worrying much about the fiscal deficit, because we are facing a very, very difficult time. I think this is the most difficult time during the last 100 years. So we have to compromise with the fiscal scenarios, and we should not be that much worried about the fiscal deficit, whether it is 5% or 6% or 7%. Because we have to support our people, our citizens, and to save them from the pandemic impact. And as businesses are not able to grow that much, so in this pandemic environment, so government has to support the systems, and government is supporting during the last 18-19 months. Government has provided a great support to all the segments of the economy with a great stimulus program. And going forward, I believe if we are able to grow much, and we are able to post the good growth numbers, the ratio of the fiscal deficit will be automatically adjusted when we go in the higher and higher trajectory, and fiscal deficit as percent of GDP becomes also rational. So now the fiscal deficit is high because at one side we are impacted by the pandemic, and our GDP went down significantly, and our spending also increased. So that's why the ratio of the fiscal deficit spending in proportion to GDP was in the high trajectory. So going forward, I believe the government is also very cautious that there should not be any wasteful expenditure. There should be meaningful expenditure, meaningful reforms, and effective reforms. But we have to support the people with a great compromise on the fiscal scenarios.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you,
I
sir.
hope, yes, we can pick up this more in the class, Andre, with respect to how fiscally responsible the government. Basically, there is a fiscal responsibility and budget management act in India, so that governs how much the government's different, basically how much India can spend and how it controls the fiscal deficit. So we'll have a discussion on this, but thank you so much for sort of bringing this up. Do we have any other questions from the students? Otherwise, we can maybe start with the professors if they are here. I could see one professor. Maybe she has something to ask. Okay. So, would any professors like to have any sort of ask any questions, Doctor? I don't know if it has to be very voluntary. Dr. Divedi has a question. Dr. Divedi, can we hear from you? Can you please open your audio and video, and maybe we can.
Please. Yeah, I can. Am I
Yeah.
audible?
Yes, you are audible, but we can't see you.
I think that would be okay if I'll open the
Okay,
video, then
sure.
the
Sure.
bandwidth is not because I'm working from home today.
Okay, all right.
I'm not at office. So Dr. Sharma, thank you so much. Although I have so many questions, but but since you are representing the institution which is an interface between the industry and the government, so my question is that what kind of industry expectations do you see which are unique this time from the budget, in your opinion?
Industry expectations from the union budget.
Union budget, yes.
Yeah. Industry expectations from the union budget are that government should reduce the tax burden, number one, because industry is always in the view of simplification of the tax environment. And though GST is not coming under the ambit of union budget because there is a separate GST task force, so industry is not expecting much happening in the GST scenario. But we have suggested that GST rate should not be high as per the current GST slabs. That highest slab is at around 28%, and we have suggested the government that there must be 3 slabs only: 5%, 10%, and 15%. And GST peak rate should not be more than 15% going forward. But that should not happen in the budget. We believe that will be under the ambit of the GST task force. On the other side, we have suggested the government to lower the burden of the direct taxation also, because now particularly the small businesses, MSMEs, are facing high tax environment in the corporate taxation segment. Though the government reduced the corporate tax to the level of 25%, and for the newer businesses at the level of 17% effective rate, but that is not implemented or implementable for the small businesses, because most of the MSMEs at around 80-90% are coming under the ambit of proprietary business. And government has not covered those MSMEs which are in the partnership and proprietary business. So they are facing the high incidence of taxation, more than 30% still in the current environment. So that is the expectation, that government should consider all the MSMEs, whether in the proprietary business or in the other corporate business, and in this segment of the taxation of 25%. And we have suggested the government that there must be more and more simplification of the compliances, because cost of compliances is very high for the industry, which is under the ambit of ease of doing business. So if we are going to boost the entrepreneurship, or we are going to push the trajectory of the startups, then we have to come out with more and more simple rules for the small businesses, particularly the lesser number of compliances and the single window system across the states. Those single window systems are there, but single window systems are not that much effective. To make them effective throughout the states, we have suggested that there must be a time-bound action for the single window system throughout the country, though government has introduced recently, and government is very keen and conducting so many meetings with the industry bodies, with the private players, to make it more and more effective. So going forward, I think there is a need for awareness and to use the single window system adequately. And again, we have suggested the labor reforms, that government is taking so many steps for the labor reforms, but those reforms should also be implemented by the states. So center and state policies synchronization is needed at this juncture to move forward. And we have suggested the reforms for the agriculture sector, that agriculture sector is a major livelihood for the most of the Indians, and still more than 50% of the population is still dependent on the agriculture sector. But agriculture incomes are not that much intact to support the economy, to create demand in the country. So there must be more and more focus on the agriculture reforms, particularly the agriculture infrastructure in terms of the cold storage, warehousing, rural roads, connectivity with the mandis, and availability of the seeds and the state-of-the-art equipments to the farmers, availability of credit to the farmers, then crop insurance. All these things should be once again focused and supported adequately in the budget.
Okay.
So these were the prominent reforms suggested by us to the government, and our expectation is also same from the government, that government should consider, for the benefit of trade and industry and the people, to become a $5 trillion economy in the next 4 or 5 years.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Can I
Thank you,
ask
Trivedi ji. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, you can ask n number of questions within the limited time trajectory.
So it's an observation. You may you may concur this observation, or you may refuse to that also. During the pandemic period, the induced demand went down, or when it was actually almost negative, and government expenditure, that is autonomous demand, was got increased. But my observation is that previous to the pandemic period, the government was facing the fall in the induced demand already, right? So this is my observation based on some data which I had gathered from different agencies. So my first question is, have you also observed this kind of thing, or how am I connecting these points? Because I have observed that to push this induced demand, government decided to or the government decisions are more towards pushing the demand in the rural areas. So increasing the farmers income and all those kind of decisions are a kind of indication that government is trying to push the induced demand. So I'm connecting these points that pandemic is just an incidence which has happened, but otherwise Indian economy was already facing the problem of induced demand. Am I correct?
Yes, you are totally 100% correct that government focused majorly on the rural demand trajectory before the pandemic period also, because the thrust of the reforms is to create the equitable economic environment, which is the balanced environment, because sometimes there are disparities in the country, and people sometime in the services or the metropolitan cities grow significantly high as compared with the rural segment. So to enhance the income levels of the rural people, because rural economy is a major support for the Indian economy to move forward. Without the help of the rural economy, we can't grow in the higher and sustainable growth trajectory. Because as we observed, and I also showed in my presentation, that growth was at around 4% before the pandemic period, because demand was not happening actually in the rural segments, and rural demand was also stagnated because of so many factors, because of high cost of some utilities, like they spend majorly on 3-4 things, like education of the children, and then their health related issues, and then food. So the expenditure on the durables was decelerating, and demand was becoming stagnant in the pre-corona period also. So government supported and government provided so many reforms. If you remember, during the months of July, August, September, October, November, December, there were reforms for each and every segment of the economy, for particularly for the rural segments, for the construction activities, infrastructure development activities, and the economy was on the verge of looking up in the months of February, March 2020. But unfortunately, pandemic hit the economy, and we were impacted, and we saw severe deceleration in the economic indicators.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And thanks, Dr. Payal, for arranging this talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining, Dr. Dwivedi. I wish your students could have joined as well, because we really wanted to take up more and more questions from the students.
They have joined. They are there. I can see them, but I don't know why they are not asking questions.
All right, yes. So just coming to this question of induced demand, there was some question, Dr. Jha, I don't know, because I'm also relatively sort of new in the organization. So there was a question which was asked on infrastructure, expenditure on infrastructure development. So for instance, like nowadays when I come from Delhi to Dehradun, and earlier the roads were not good, but recently within 1 year we see 1.5 years that the roads have become excellent. So can we say that with the kind of stimulus packages that the government is sort of giving or sort of coming out with addressing the pandemic, the conservative or traditional spending that we have had on infrastructure spending, uh, that is sort of getting balanced, or what is the kind of factor which we see should be the priority, like for the government? We see that there is a lot of spending both way, in both the areas, but how do we actually see what is a priority, and that matched with the health budget? Because now the projection for the next budget would be that there would be an increase of health budget to almost, by the proposal is to 130% plus. So how is the government going to manage all these expenses?
Yes, Professor Payal, very good question, because as you are aware and you know that infrastructure development is a key ingredient of any economy to become more and more sustainable and strong in the growth scenario. And in the same line, government and the thrust of the policymakers is always on the infrastructure development, though sometimes there was a major thrust, sometimes the thrust was not that much intact because of so many factors. But during the last 7-8 years, I believe the thrust of the government on the infrastructure development is very, very high, and government has introduced a NIP, National Infrastructure Pipeline, which is more than 100 lakh crore to support the overall infrastructure in the country. And there are allocations for each and every growing sector of the economy, which is related to infrastructure, for the power, for rural roads, for the national highways, for the development of airports, ports, railways, and allocations for the social infrastructure like health and education and other basic amenities for the required by the people. So government is very, very keen, and thrust of the government is to provide adequate allocations for the infrastructure development. And recently government introduced a policy which is the Gati Shakti. Gati Shakti is to connect all the departments which are related to the infrastructure development in the country, and to spend adequately the national infrastructure pipeline of more than 100 lakh crore. So going forward, I believe the thrust of the government should also remain intact on the infrastructure development in the country, because infrastructure multiplier is a great thing in the developing countries like India. If we spend in the infrastructure development, then also our GDP is also boosted by the same speed of the infrastructure spending. So the target, I believe, should be to enhance the infrastructure spending to the level of 10% of GDP every year. So that will provide a great opportunity to the various stakeholders of the country to become more and more competitive, and to become more and more efficient in the production possibilities, and to compete much in the international markets.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma. Any other questions? We can take maybe one or two more questions, and then you would like to. Yeah, somebody was saying.
Yeah, Payal, this is me, Manjari. I was
Yes,
wondering
hello.
if I can ask. Yeah, hi. Hi, thank you, Dr. Sharma. That was a very, very interesting talk. And I, being from a non-economics, non-business, background, this has been really very, very helpful in understanding what really we could be looking forward to. So my question may come across as a very layperson's question. This is something to do with, we have been talking about, government spending on infrastructure development. So where does R&D figure in all of this? I mean, I'm particularly thinking about the manufacturing sector in India, and our, we have our dependence on on China for heavy machinery, on not just China but many other countries on heavy machinery, on some of the intermittent goods which we require in order to actually drive our manufacturing sector. So where do you think the government stand would be on that when it concerns the budget?
Yes, very good question, because now our focus must be on the innovation, development of innovation, and we must be very, very adaptive of the technologies. And the problem why this disconnect is happening, because our industry, our manufacturers are not able to produce the volumes. Because China, like other countries in the East Asia, they produce volumes and they are able to export much in the international market, and that's why their volumes growth create economies of scale. But in India, though domestic demand is also not that much intact, sometimes the demand happens, and in the following years, demand is impacted by so many factors, and in the global market also our exports were stagnated at around 270 to 80 billion dollar, or sometimes 300 billion dollars. So domestic and international demand was not that much explored by the manufacturers, because of the they are not able to create the economies of scale, because the increased production volumes, because the volumes are not consumed either in the domestic market or in the international market, and our capacities are at around 70-80 of the total capacity. So with the efficiency, with the adoption of the technologies, with more and more innovation, I believe there is a need to focus more on R&D activity to become more innovative, and to produce much efficiently, and with the larger economies of scale, and with the increased price cost margins, profitability. And that will create a great sentiment for the businesses to produce more and to adopt more and more technologies. And I believe there must be focus on the R&D activity. There are some incentives from the government for the R&D activity, because now the R&D activity is not that much intact in the country, and the total spending on R&D is less than 1% of the GDP. So we should focus more on the R&D activity and to become more and more innovative, so that larger production possibilities and economies of scale are created in the country, and we are able to produce volumes, and to become more and more competitive in the international market in terms of the consumed production, enhanced production volumes.
Okay, thank you so much, Manjari, for the question. Of course, we all think of being researchers, professors, and researchers ourselves. We always think about the component of R&D. So when we compare to ourselves like India to other countries like Israel, which have a R&D budget of up to 12 to 10% of I think the entire spending in some sector, I think the innovation, some sort of a specific innovation budget is there in Israel. So, but when we talk about even schemes like Atmanirbhar, we don't see sort of a despite having a co-vaccine which is indigenous completely, we still don't see sort of a budget on R&D, whether it is Atmanirbhar or any other scheme. So that is something that is very, I think, that would make India maybe more self-reliant, or maybe move towards more having that kind of share in the global world in terms of both R&D and manufacturing in particular. So that's just one thought that I had. So any other question anybody would want to sort of bring up any point, or have any other follow-up comment or something like that? Any of the students? Okay, so I think we just have a few more minutes left. If there are any other questions, we could. Yeah, Dr. Dwivedi, do you have any question?
Yeah, I have a very small question, sir. What do you see for the salaried class in this budget? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Dr. Dwivedi. So
Yes,
what's
Dr. Dwivedi, please come
the
forward.
salary?
Yeah.
Add to that question of Dr. Dwivedi.
My question is, what do you see for the salaried class in the union budget this time?
I am expecting some relief in the direct tax, that government should increase the, I believe, some availability of the home loans, that as some income is exempted up to the level of 2 lakhs. So we are expecting that government should increase this amount to the level of 2.5 or 3 lakhs, so that the demand in the housing sector is generated, and also infrastructure development or housing development in the country becomes strong.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes.
So, Professor Payal, I would like to take a leave, because now
Sure.
I have to join another meeting after
Yes,
at 6:15.
Sure, sure. Thank you. So thank you, Dr. Sharma. I don't have a very elaborate vote of thanks, but I really appreciate you taking out the time and making us, enlightening us during this evening. It's a very critical time for all of us. Budgets always create a buzz in academic institutions also, and we are all always enthusiastic about the component of education and other things. So with this, I think on behalf of everyone, the Dean ma'am, I think Dean ma'am had joined us. She's not connected right now. So on behalf of the faculty members and the student fraternity and UPS, I really thank you for your time. And as just as a closing remark, we are a very small group at UPS in the School of Business. So we look forward to engaging with everyone and maybe developing these think tank sort of questions, which is the public policy group. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma. Have a pleasant evening, and please keep yourselves warm because of the snowfall. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, all the faculty members.
Thank you, Professor Payal, for inviting me, and I look forward more and more interactions in the coming times.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So we just close now.